The cavern twisted around Elias, a labyrinth of basalt and shadow swallowing every beam of his headlamp. He knelt beside a battered audio recorder, the plastic cracked and dulled by years of hard use. His hands, calloused and steady, adjusted the levels, each movement practiced, precise. Headphones clamped over his ears, he listened, face drawn, brow furrowed in concentration. A subtle alien thrum vibrated through the stone beneath his knees, so faint it almost escaped him. It was not wind, not the distant drip of water, not the settling of ancient rock. It vibrated inside his bones, a low resonance that seemed to touch the marrow. "That's not natural," he muttered, his words nearly swallowed by the oppressive hush. He rose, cautious, boots scraping softly on the uneven ground. The headlamp's beam jittered ahead, its circle of light shivering over jagged stone. Each footstep echoed, but the deeper he pressed into the cave, the thicker the air became, the silence growing almost tangible, like a hand pressing against his chest. The thrum intensified. It was no longer merely sound, but sensation, a frequency that seemed to pulse from nowhere and everywhere, saturating the darkness. Elias's hand trembled as he traced the invisible source, following the readings on the digital scanner in his other hand. The numbers danced and spiked with each step. Without warning, the tunnel opened into a chamber he had never mapped, a space that seemed to exist outside the normal logic of the cave. He paused on the threshold, breath shallow. The far wall was not stone, not anything he recognized. It was a flawless pane of midnight glass, so deep it seemed to swallow his lamp's glow entirely. His own reflection stared back at him, distorted, ghostly, the edges of his face blurred by the impossible darkness. The scanner shrieked, lights flaring in a frantic cascade. Elias stared at the readout, heart pounding. Irresistibly, he reached out, his palm pressed flat to the cold, glassy surface. No sensation of movement, just a sudden, silent convulsion in reality. The world twisted, inverted itself. He fell, but not down. He fell through, the inside of his own skin shuddering as the universe folded. He landed hard on a floor that was not stone, not earth. It was softly radiant crystal, the surface warm beneath his hands. The space glowed with a gentle internal light. No shadows, no visible source, just illumination emanating from every surface. The silence was so complete it pressed against his ears, made his head swim. Elias gasped, tried to shout. His mouth opened, his chest heaved, but no sound emerged. Panic clawed at him, cold and primal. He staggered upright, legs unsteady, heart slamming against his ribs. From the far end of the chamber, two figures materialized, tall, humanoid, their bodies faceted like living quartz. Their skin caught the light in shifting planes of teal and silver, their hands gripping staffs that thrummed with energy. Their faces were smooth, unreadable, eyes like shards of starlight. They glided forward, movements fluid and inhuman. Elias shrank back, hands raised in instinctive defense. The sentinels' staffs hummed, energy flaring along their length. A third figure entered behind them, taller, presence unmistakable. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with blue-green bioluminescent markings winding across her face and bare arms. Iridescent eyes shifted and shimmered, never settling on one color. Dark, wavy hair framed her features, falling beyond her shoulders and half concealing the garment of white fur draped across her, leaving one shoulder exposed to the glow. She surveyed Elias, her gaze sharp, unblinking. Something in her bearing, commanding, assured, made the sentinels pause. Elias's throat burned with the urge to speak. He forced the words out, voice raw. "Where am I?" The words fractured the silence, shattering it like glass. The sound rolled through the chamber impossibly loud. The sentinels recoiled, their bodies erupting in jagged bursts of warning light. The woman, Princess Lyrael, stepped forward, markings shimmering in response. Her eyes widened, a spark of fascination igniting behind their shifting colors. She lifted her hand, palm outward, her mind brushing against his, a surge of intent, wordless but undeniable. She gestured, and the sentinels closed in, forming a living barrier around Elias. Lyrael stood before him, her expression fierce and bright. In that moment, her posture spoke for her. Elias was her discovery, her claim, her secret to keep. Elias paced the crystalline suite, every surface aglow with a subtle internal radiance. The walls shimmered with shifting light, pale and otherworldly, their smooth planes etched with geometric patterns that seemed to flow and rearrange when he looked away. The room was large, luxurious even, its furniture carved from the same glowing stone, humming with faint pulses that made the floor feel alive beneath his bare feet. Yet it was a cage, beautiful and inescapable. He pressed his palm to the transparent wall that overlooked the city, a labyrinth of spires and bridges, all lit from within by the same gentle light. Beyond, an endless twilight stretched, neither true day nor night. Time slipped by, and Elias learned to mark the cycles by the ebb and swell of the city's glow. When the outer towers faded to indigo and the inner courtyards brightened to gold, he knew another day had passed, though he no longer trusted his sense of time. His battered audio recorder had been taken, left somewhere beyond the walls, and the only voice he heard was his own, echoing softly in his mind. Lyrael visited daily. She entered in silence, gliding across the crystal floor, bioluminescent markings on her face and arms shifting in unreadable patterns, sometimes flickering with curiosity, sometimes dimmed in contemplation. She never spoke, not in words, but Elias felt her mind brush against his, sending impressions that hovered just beyond understanding, fragments of emotion, flashes of memory, the pulse of a world unlike his own. He tried to reach back, to speak to her with thought alone, but it was like shouting into deep water. His intent diffused, lost before it could reach her. She would tilt her head, studying him with those iridescent eyes, as if waiting for something he could not give. Then she would slip away, leaving him once more to silence and the restless ache of isolation. He yearned for the comfort of sound, for the cadence of human speech, the music of laughter, even the mundane rhythm of footsteps on stone. The silence gnawed at him, more oppressive than any prison. His only companion was his enigmatic, beautiful captor, who watched him as one might study a rare and dangerous animal. One cycle, when the ache became unbearable, Elias curled up on the crystalline bed. The sheets shimmered cool against his skin. He closed his eyes and began to hum, a lullaby from his childhood, its melody simple and plaintive. The tune wove through the silence, trembling at first, then gaining strength. It was a fragment of earth, a memory of warmth and safety carried on his breath. Lyrael was standing by the window. At the sound, she froze, her entire body going rigid. Her markings flared, bright as lightning, then rippled through a spectrum of turquoise, gold, and violet, overwhelmed by the surge of emotion in his song. Her eyes widened, reflecting the shifting lights, and she turned to face him fully. She crossed the room in swift gliding steps, stopping so close he could feel the cool energy that radiated from her skin. Her gaze was hungry, insistent, as if she were starved for something he possessed. "Again," she said, the word unformed, spoken more in his mind than aloud, but clear in its intent. "Please, more." Elias hesitated, then sang. The melody slipped past his lips, hesitant at first, then surer, a thread of longing carried on each note. Lyrael knelt beside the bed, eyes closed, her breath shallow. The sound seemed to saturate the very air, making the crystal walls shimmer in response. When he finished, she lingered, the silence now charged with meaning. That was the beginning of the ritual. Each cycle, Lyrael would come, sometimes with a basket of strange, fragrant fruits, whose juices stained his fingers gold, sometimes bearing fabrics that shimmered with colors he could not name. She placed these gifts at the foot of his bed, watching as he sampled the offerings. In return, she asked for his music. He would hum, sing, or simply speak, telling stories of a world she could only imagine. His words became a sensation for her, something her people had forgotten, or perhaps had never known. Though cherished, he remained a captive. The crystalline door sealed behind Lyrael each time she left. Tavir, the chief sentinel, stationed himself in the corridor, a silent, stoic presence whose quartzine form flickered with disapproval whenever Lyrael lingered too long. Yet Tavir obeyed her, bowing his head in deference, his eyes always tracking Elias with wary suspicion. Over time, the boundaries of their ritual blurred. Lyrael began to sit closer, her curiosity deepening into something more possessive, more intimate. She watched his lips as he sang, tracing the shape of each word, absorbing not just the melody but the feeling behind it. Her bioluminescent markings shifted in time with his voice, as if some secret chord connected them. When he laughed, she startled, as if the sound was a new and precious gift. When he faltered, she touched his hand, her skin cool and electric. Elias found himself performing for her, choosing songs that held meaning, stories that resonated. In those moments, the cage felt less suffocating. He watched her face, searching for cracks in her alien composure, for hints of the person beneath the luminous skin. Sometimes, when he finished a song, she would look away, the tips of her fingers trembling. He wondered what his music awoke in her: nostalgia, longing, regret. Yet the sense of captivity never left. He was treasured, but not free. One evening, as the suite's walls glowed with the deep violet of the city's dusk, Tavir entered first, his body tense, eyes flickering in warning. Lyrael was seated beside Elias, her bare shoulder almost touching his. Without knocking, another figure swept into the room. Prince Kalen stood tall and rigid, his presence filling the chamber with cold energy. His markings were sharp, crystalline lines of indigo and white, flickering with disdain. His gaze raked over Elias, an assessment, a judgment. His lips curled in distaste as he took in the scene. Lyrael, seated close to the outsider, hands resting on the gifts she'd brought. "Lyrael," Kalen said, his voice a low chime of authority. "You waste yourself on this primitive." Lyrael's markings blazed, her posture shifting subtly between defiance and protectiveness. She rose, placing herself between Elias and Kalen. "He is mine," she replied, her voice ringing through the suite, more emotion than Elias had ever heard from her. "He is not to be harmed." Kalen's eyes narrowed. "Your fascination weakens you. The council will not accept this indulgence." His glare shifted to Elias, cold and cutting. "You do not belong here." Elias felt the weight of Kalen's disdain, the threat unspoken but unmistakable. Tavir stood silent by the door, his loyalty divided, watching the exchange with anxious eyes. Lyrael dismissed Kalen with a single imperious gesture. "Leave us." Her tone brooked no argument. The prince hesitated, his pride bristling, but he turned and swept from the room, the air shimmering with the force of his anger. As the door sealed behind him, Lyrael knelt before Elias, her expression fierce. "Do not fear him," she said, her hand hovering over his. "You are safe here." But Elias understood, as surely as he felt the pulse of the city beneath his feet. To survive in this place, he would have to become indispensable. He would have to make his voice, His music, something they could not bear to lose. Elias pressed his fingertips to the crystalline wall, searching for its secrets. The surface was cool, perfectly smooth, but as he tapped, subtle vibrations echoed beneath his skin. He had grown attuned to the peculiarities of his prison, the way every pane, every pillar, responded to the slightest impulse with a faint musical resonance. The crystal was not inert. It sang, if only one knew how to listen. He crouched by the base of a tall pillar in the corner of his suite, closing his eyes. He tapped once, then again, shifting the pad of his thumb until he found the frequency that responded most intensely. A pure, ringing tone that hummed through his bones. It was a frequency only he seemed to sense, just beyond the edge of hearing, a living memory that shimmered in the back of his mind. When Lyrael entered, gliding across the room with her customary silent grace, Elias turned, excitement flickering in his gaze. "Come here," he said softly, beckoning her. She hesitated, her bioluminescent markings swirling with pale blue curiosity. He guided her hand, her fingers cool and elegant, to the pillar's surface. "Feel this," he murmured, his voice low and steady. He steadied her wrist with his warm hand, then sang, a clear, unwavering note, matched precisely to the pillar's resonance. The crystal glowed, a vivid line of light pulsing from base to apex, vibrating in perfect synchrony with his voice. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. Lyrael's eyes widened in awe, her markings flaring with electric blue and gold. She gazed at him as if he had conjured a miracle. "How?" Her voice was a whisper, laced with wonder. "Everything vibrates," Elias explained, searching her face. "Your world is made of song, even if you've forgotten the words." He coaxed her to hum, gently adjusting her pitch until the pillar thrummed again, the light shifting from turquoise to rose. Her eyes shone, and a breathless laugh escaped her. An unguarded sound, bright as sunlight on water. He began to experiment, mapping the room's harmonics, cataloging each frequency, each subtle echo that rippled through the crystal. He found that, with careful placement and the right notes, he could set up standing waves, patterns of light that danced across the walls in shifting mosaics. He became a sculptor of echoes, a composer for a crystal symphony. Lyrael followed his every gesture, her devotion unmistakable. She mirrored his tones, her mind touching his in tentative pulses of joy and discovery. Their lessons grew intimate. He would guide her hands, positioning her fingers just so, his warm skin against her cool, luminous touch. Together, they shaped the vibrations, weaving a secret language in the hush between notes. Sometimes, when their voices aligned perfectly, the chamber would flood with radiant color, the crystal walls resonating so deeply that the air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. One cycle, as dusk swept across the city and the suite's walls blushed with amethyst and gold, Elias sang a haunting note, a melody from his memory tinged with longing. Lyrael sat beside him, her markings shimmering in response. The colors deepened, flushing with rose and gold, pulsing to the rhythm of his voice. She closed her eyes and her mind reached for his, not with cold analysis, but with warmth and yearning. He felt her longing as if it were his own, a harmonic blend of loneliness and hope, desire and fear. For the first time, their minds harmonized, not just their voices, and the sensation left them both breathless. When the song faded, Lyrael lingered close, her eyes searching his face. "We have been silent for so long," she murmured, her voice trembling. "Your music, it is dangerous, but I cannot turn away." Unbeknownst to them, Kalen watched from a high balcony, his gaze cold and calculating. Where Lyrael saw revelation, he saw threat, a princess tainted by the influence of a noisy interloper. His markings sharpened to jagged indigo, flickering with restrained anger. He turned away, already plotting how to use this growing intimacy against her. Later, intrigued by Elias's logic and persistence, Lyrael brought him a memory crystal, an artifact shaped like a teardrop, glowing with a pale internal light. She pressed it to his forehead, her markings shifting into soft greens and blues as she acted as his interpreter. Visions poured into his mind. He saw the history of the Lithari, fractured images of a people who had once filled their world with song, their cities alive with harmony. But before this age of music, there was only blankness, an empty silence that stretched back into unremembered time. The images vibrated at a frequency that tugged at something deep in Elias's memory, echoing the thrum he had felt in the portal chamber. He broke away, breathless, the memory crystal glowing hot in his hand. "There's something missing," he told Lyrael. "Your silence. It isn't natural. It's a wound." Lyrael regarded him, torn between fear and fascination. "The elders say our silence keeps us safe." "Safe from what?" Elias pressed. "Let me show you." After much persuasion, Lyrael relented, granting Elias access to the city's core, a colossal hall of crystal, the very heart of their world. Tavir, the ever-watchful sentinel, accompanied them, his faceted eyes flickering with distrust. The royal advisor, an ancient figure draped in shimmering robes, hovered in the background, wary and silent. The hall was vast, its ceiling lost in radiant mist. Immense crystal columns rose from the floor, pulsing with energy. It was a place of power, humming with a resonance so profound that Elias's skin tingled as he stepped inside. He unpacked his equipment, carefully restored from the Sentinel's keeping, and laid out his battered audio recorder, his battered laptop, the battered microphones. He felt oddly comforted by the familiar weight of his tools. Lyrael stood at his side, her anxiety palpable. "Be careful," she whispered. "The core is sacred." Elias nodded, focusing on the task. He mapped the resonance of the great crystal, layering harmonics with his voice and with carefully calibrated tones from his devices. The column responded, light swirling inside it, the energy rising in waves. Then, abruptly, darkness erupted from the crystal, a psychic static that flooded the chamber, drowning every sense. Elias staggered, clutching his head as visions tore through him. He saw the Lithari as they had been, singers whose voices shaped mountains, whose harmonies bent light and stone. He saw their songs turning to violence, symphonies of destruction that cracked the world, shattered cities, left the land scarred. He saw a council of desperate elders, their faces drawn with grief, sealing away their voices, imposing silence as the only shield against their own ruin. The visions battered Elias, then spilled into Lyrael. She gasped, her markings flaring white with horror, her knees buckling beneath her. Tavir lunged to catch her, but she collapsed, eyes wide and unseeing, the memory crystal tumbling from her grasp. Elias crawled to her side, panic rising. He cradled her shoulders, murmuring her name. The truth blazed between them, clear, inescapable. The silence of the Lithari was no accident, no tradition. It was a prison, forged to contain a power too vast for safety. Lyrael's bloodline was the legacy of the most potent voices. Her music could shape or destroy. Elias's song had reawakened that power. Alarms blared through the crystal corridors, the pure tones splitting into jagged shrieks as they bounced from one surface to the next. Light pulsed crimson along the walls, casting sharp shadows that seemed to shudder with each wave of sound. Sentinels burst into the core chamber, their faceted bodies ablaze with warning, staffs humming with furious energy. They swept past Elias, barely sparing him a glance, Their focus was on Lyrael, collapsed at the base of the great crystal, her markings still flaring in ghostly white. Tavir, usually so composed, barked a string of commands in the Lithari tongue. The other sentinels moved with ruthless efficiency, forming a defensive wall around the fallen princess. For a heartbeat, Elias thought they might strike at him, but their stances were angled to protect, not attack. The true danger was not the outsider, but what Lyrael had become, a vessel for forbidden power. The double doors flew open with a thunderous crack. Prince Kalen strode into the chaos, his markings a jagged lattice of indigo and scarlet, eyes hard with victory. "Enough," he thundered, voice amplified by the crystal itself. "The line has been crossed." He pointed at Lyrael, his accusation ringing through the hall. "Princess Lyrael has committed heresy. She has unleashed the forbidden sound, endangering the core, endangering us all. She is unfit to rule." Lyrael tried to rise, bracing herself on trembling arms, but her mind was still fractured by the revelation. Her eyes were unfocused, her voice no more than a whisper. "I only wanted to understand, to remember who we were." Kalen's lips curled in disdain. "Your curiosity has always been your weakness. You threaten everything we have built with your reckless hunger for the old ways. The court will decide your fate, as tradition demands." Across the palace, the mindweb erupted with confusion and terror. The court's collective consciousness shivered, links flickering and fraying as ancient fears roared back to life. Words and images tumbled through the ether. Memories of destruction, of song turned to ruin, of silence chosen as the only path to survival. The council's voices overlapped in panic, authority crumbling beneath the weight of chaos. Elias felt the psychic shockwave wash over him, raw and suffocating. He reached for Lyrael, but the sentinels seized him, yanking him back with crystalline hands. "He is the catalyst," one murmured. "Separate him. He must not interfere." They dragged Elias away, past the collapsed princess and the furious prince, through winding corridors that pulsed with alarm. Tavir led the escort, his face a blank mask, markings flickering between suspicion and regret. The door to Elias's new cell hissed open, a smaller, darker room, its only window a sliver of glowing crystal far overhead. As the lock sealed behind him, Elias's fear for himself faded to insignificance. Only Lyrael filled his mind, her pain, her vulnerability, the fire in her spirit now smothered by guilt and doubt. He pressed his forehead to the cool crystal wall, fighting the urge to scream. He paced the confines, mind racing. The sentinels had confiscated most of his equipment, but not all. He still had scraps, enough to improvise. With trembling fingers, Elias dismantled his audio recorder, prying loose the tiny resonator and a coil of conductive thread. He spliced wires, tuning them by touch and memory, not to create a weapon but something subtler, a communicator, designed to send messages not as sound, but as patterns of vibration only a Lithari could sense through the crystal. He waited, tension coiling in his gut. When Tavir arrived with his meal, a tray of strange fruits and luminous water, Elias sat cross-legged in the center of the cell, device cradled in his palm. He looked up, voice low. "Tavir, I need you to listen, not with your ears, with this." He activated the communicator, sending a pulse through the crystal. The message was simple, but layered with intent. Harmony is not destruction. Control is strength. Trust is the key. Tavir's stance faltered, his markings rippling in confusion. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Tavir closed his eyes. The pulse was not heard, but felt. A deep resonance in the crystal, a message that bypassed logic and spoke to something older, deeper. Tavir opened his eyes, meeting Elias's gaze. Elias pleaded silently, "Help me save her." A long pause, the chamber's silence hanging between them like a held breath. Finally, Tavir's markings shifted, deepening to a rich blue, the color of trust. He reached out, fingers hovering over the lock, and the door slid open without a word. They moved swiftly through the empty corridors, Tavir leading with silent purpose. At a side entrance, Elias hesitated. The resonance chamber. She'll be there, or nowhere. Tavir nodded once, his features carved in resolve. You have until the next cycle bell. After that, I can protect you no longer. Elias slipped into the resonance chamber, heart pounding. The space was empty, save for Lyrael, hunched near a pillar, head bowed. The crystalline walls shimmered with faint, mournful light. She looked up as he entered, her face pale, markings flickering with agony. You should not be here, she whispered. If Kalen finds you, he won't. Tavir's guarding the door. Elias knelt before her, careful not to touch her trembling hands. Lyrael, listen. They're going to put you on trial, aren't they? She nodded, voice brittle. The trial of resolve. A duel. Of logic. Of light. Of mind. Kalen is a master. My thoughts are chaos now. I will lose. Elias shook his head. Not if we do this together. He opened his palm, revealing the resonator he had crafted. You don't need to fight him with force. We'll use harmony. Emotion isn't chaos. It's power, if you shape it. Lyrael stared at the device, hope flickering for the first time in her eyes. How? I cannot even trust my own mind. Let me show you. He guided her hand to the resonator, covering her fingers with his. Feel the pulse. It's not violence. It's understanding. Connection. That's what Kalen fears. What your people have forgotten. He began to teach her, voice low, his words a bridge across her fear. He showed her how to channel her emotions, not as raw force, but as patterns, structured, resonant, a music that built rather than shattered. When she faltered, he caught her hand, steadying her. Listen to yourself, Elias murmured. Your sorrow, your love, your hope. These are not weaknesses. They're the foundation of harmony. Shape them. Let them flow through you, not break you. Lyrael tried, eyes squeezed shut. The resonator glowed softly, pulsing in time with her uncertain breath. It's too much. He drew her close, forehead to forehead, their hands joined around the device. I'm here, he whispered. We'll do this together. Gradually their minds brushed, first tentative, then bold. Lyrael's thoughts spilled into his. Fear, longing, regret, and something deeper, fiercely bright. Elias opened himself in return, offering not words but the truth in his soul. I love you. The confession thrummed between them, silent and certain, a harmony deeper than speech. Lyrael's eyes brimmed with tears, her markings glowing with new light. We are more than our silence, she whispered. We are more, together. Their lesson became a duet of minds, a forging of trust and love. When the time came to face the trial, neither would be alone. The day of the trial dawned bright and cold. The amphitheater, a cavernous bowl hewn from living crystal, gleamed with shifting light, each surface humming with anticipation. Thousands of Lithari filled the terraces, their bioluminescent markings restless and electric, a sea of turquoise, indigo, and gold. The collective silence was absolute, expectant, and it pressed down on the arena floor like the eye of a storm. At the heart of the arena stood Lyrael, her posture proud despite the tremor in her hands. Her markings were pale, subdued, but a fierce glow flickered beneath the surface. Across from her, Kalen towered in rigid confidence, his own markings sharp and bright as lightning. They faced each other in the ancient pattern of the trial of resolve, logic against logic, mind against mind, power sealed within the bounds of ritual. Behind Lyrael stood Elias, his presence an open defiance of every rule and tradition. The court gasped as one, a ripple of disbelief and outrage, markings flaring and dimming in quick succession. It was unthinkable. A human, a stranger, standing with their princess at the moment of judgment. Kalen sneered, spreading his arms to address the crowd. "Behold, the princess brings her pet to the duel," he declared, his voice amplified by the arena's acoustics. "Is this what our royal blood has come to, relying on the guidance of a primitive outsider?" A low, uneasy murmur rippled through the onlookers. Lyrael lifted her chin, refusing to flinch. Elias met Kalen's gaze, unyielding. He could feel the court's hostility, the weight of their fear and hope, all focused on this single moment. The trial began with a silent pulse, a signal through the mind web. Kalen struck first, eyes narrowing as he unleashed a psychic assault. The air thickened, charged with invisible force. His attack was not violence, but a wave of cold, merciless logic. He conjured every doubt, every fear that haunted Lyrael's soul, laying them bare for all to see. "You are weak," Kalen's voice echoed in her mind, layered with the voices of her ancestors and the judgment of the court. "You have always been reckless. You endanger the world with your hunger for the forbidden. You have failed your people. You will fail again." Lyrael staggered under the onslaught. Images flashed before her, the devastation of the past, the collapse of cities under the power of song, the silence that followed, the burden of her bloodline. For a heartbeat, she nearly faltered. Elias reached for her. Just a whisper of thought, a steady anchor in the maelstrom. "I am here. You are not alone." Lyrael closed her eyes. She inhaled, steadying herself as she drew on the storm within. Her fear, yes, but also her anger, her hope, her fierce love for her people, and the new, fragile love blooming for Elias. She did not fight her feelings. She let them rise and swirl, a living current. Then she sang. A single, perfect note slipped from her lips, a tone so pure and resonant that it seemed to tremble in every heart present. The sound cut through Kalen's logic, bypassed argument, and burrowed into the silent core of each Lithari. It was not a weapon. It was a gift. A harmony that called out not for destruction, but for understanding. The note unfurled, gentle and unyielding, weaving sorrow with hope, grief with possibility. It held the memory of loss and the promise of renewal. Lyrael's markings blazed, rose gold and vibrant, illuminating her from within. The air shimmered, and the amphitheater itself seemed to resonate in sympathy, the ancient stone remembering the age of song. Kalen's assault faltered. He staggered, clutching his head, eyes wide in disbelief. His logic crumbled against the emotional truth of Lyrael's music. He tried to rally, to marshal arguments and counterattacks, but the song reached him on a level beyond thought. He could not comprehend it, let alone defeat it. The duel ended before he could recover. The mind web, once tumultuous, fell into stunned silence. Across the terraces, Lithari markings shifted to gold, the color of awe, of revelation. Even the elders, their faces etched with centuries of discipline, stared in wonder. Lyrael let the last note linger, then fade. She lowered her hands, breathing hard, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She had not unleashed ruin, but transcended it, wielding harmony as strength, not destruction. Elias waited at the edge of the arena, heart pounding. Lyrael crossed the crystalline floor to him, the crowd parting in silent shock. She reached for his hand, threading her cool fingers through his, grounding herself in the warmth of his touch. Together they turned to face the court. Lyriel lifted her voice, strong and clear. The age of silence is over. We have lived in fear of our own power, but harmony is not our enemy. A new era begins with a new bond. This is Elias, my consort. He taught me to find my voice, and through voice, to find peace. A gasp swept through the crowd. The elders exchanged glances, their markings flickering, but none dared to speak against her in that moment of radiant transformation. Lyriel's words resonated through the amphitheater, echoing in the mindweb, carried on the current of her song. Elias stood at her side, no longer a captive, but a partner, her chosen, the outsider who had become the bridge between two worlds. For a heartbeat he feared rejection, but the golden glow that swept the court was acceptance, not anger. Lyriel turned to him, her eyes full of hope and promise. We begin anew, together. Hand in hand, they left the arena, passing between the ranks of stunned Lithari. Their joined shadows stretched across the crystal floor, a new symbol for a people who had learned to sing again. As they crossed the threshold into the open light, the amphitheater erupted, not in alarm, but in song. 1,000 voices rose in cautious harmony, the first music in generations. Elias smiled, heart full, knowing he was no longer a prisoner but the queen's beloved, the man who had taught a silent race to find their voice. 5 years later, the city of Virel shimmered in a harmony of light and sound. The spires, once solemn and silent, now thrummed with melodies Elias had woven into their crystal bones, layers of ambient music that shifted with the hour and the mood of the people. Lithari voices filled the air, laughter and song flowing through the plazas, their bioluminescent markings painting ribbons of color that danced in sync with every word and note. Tonight, the entire city pulsed with anticipation. It was the festival of first resonance, a night that honored not only the moment Lyriel reclaimed her people's voice, but the dawn of a new Lithari identity, one built on the bold joining of music and emotion, of logic and heart. From every balcony and bridge, banners of living crystal swayed, refracting the light into kaleidoscopic patterns. The air itself was alive, humming with possibility. Elias stood on a high balcony overlooking the central amphitheater, his hands resting on the cool rail. Below, a chorus of young Lithari gathered in a luminous arc, their faces alight with excitement. As they began to sing, threads of colored light coiled from their throats, weaving through the air in intricate patterns, responding to every nuance of pitch and harmony. Their voices, unburdened by fear, soared, sometimes playful, sometimes solemn, always free. Elias watched, pride and awe warring in his chest. He could see the subtle structures of their song, the way one melody threaded into another, how the vibrations resonated with the city's crystal heart. He had taught them how to shape sound, but now they shaped him too. The city's transformation was a living testament to the courage of a people who had once chosen silence and had learned, at last, to trust themselves. Arms slipped around him from behind, cool and familiar, and a gentle voice murmured against his ear. "They're extraordinary." He smiled, turning to find Lyriel pressed close, her markings glowing with a steady golden warmth. Her dark hair tumbled in waves over her bare shoulder, and her eyes reflected the lights of the festival. "They had the best teacher," he replied, voice soft but sure. She laughed, a sound like chimes caught in a summer breeze, and kissed him, deep and lingering, the kind of kiss that spoke of both privacy and promise. For a moment the world shrank to the warmth of her touch, the taste of her lips, the certainty that they had changed everything together. When they parted, her smile was radiant, a private sun. From inside the suite, a high, sweet voice called out, slicing through the music below. "Papa! Mama! Tavi says it's not singing right. Elias glanced down to see Saren, their daughter, standing in the doorway. She was 4 years old, her hair a tangle of dark waves, her markings flickering with playful color, turquoise, rose, and emerald. She cradled a crystal moth in her hands, its wings fluttering in a nervous, discordant pattern. Lyrael's expression softened. "Our little storm," she murmured. Elias knelt, arms open. "Come here, sweetheart." Saren raced to him, dropping to her knees with the moth perched delicately on her palm. "Listen, Papa," she demanded, holding up the creature. "It's supposed to sing, but it's all jumbly." He cupped the moth, listening to the faint off-key warble. With a gentle hum, he matched its core frequency, tuning it with a note so pure the moth stilled, then burst into a harmonious song. The light in its wings settled into a calm, cerulean glow. Saren laughed, delighted, and her joy sent a nearby vine blooming with blue-green light, its petals unfurling in time with her giggle. Lyrael's hand found Elias's shoulder, squeezing softly, their shared glance full of pride and a hint of concern. Their daughter's power was immense and wild, a living bridge between two worlds, and every day was a new lesson in balance. Saren wriggled into her mother's lap, clutching the moth. "Did you see, Mama? Papa fixed it." Lyrael brushed a strand of hair from Saren's brow, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Your Papa is the best soundcrafter in Virel. But you, little one, might be even greater." Saren's eyes shone. "I want to sing with the city when I'm big." Elias chuckled, gathering both mother and daughter in his arms. "The city will be lucky to have you, but for now, it's bedtime." "The festival will wait for morning." Saren pouted, but Lyrael lifted her, cradling the girl as she hummed a lullaby, a blend of ancient Lithari melody and Earth's gentle rhythms. Saren's markings faded to soft violet as she drifted to sleep, the moth curled in her fist, a single note of peace. Later, as the festival's lights dimmed and the city settled into a gentle, harmonic hum, Lyrael and Elias stood by Saren's bed, watching her dream. The night air was scented with blooming vines and distant laughter, a comfort that seemed to wrap around the family like a living promise. Elias lingered, brushing his daughter's cheek. "She's growing so fast. Her gifts." "Lyrael. Sometimes I wonder how we'll keep her safe." Lyrael's gaze was steady, protective. "We'll teach her, as you taught me. But there are some who fear what she is." He knew the name before she spoke it. "Kaelin." She nodded, jaw set. "He's petitioned the council for oversight. He wants Saren's training to be under their control. He fears she'll repeat the old mistakes." Elias shook his head, fierce and gentle all at once. "No, that's not happening." Lyrael's hand tightened around his. "I won't let them do to my daughter what was done to my people. Silence is not the answer." He turned to her, gathering her hands in his. "We'll show them. Saren's heart isn't a weapon. It's a gift. She's the future, not the past." Lyrael's resolve softened as she brought his hand to her lips, pressing a kiss against his knuckles. "And what do you see when you look at us?" He searched her face, voice tender. "The woman who taught a world of silence how to feel." For a heartbeat their minds met, as clear and intimate as the day their harmony had changed the fate of a world. Lyrael opened herself, projecting a chord of pure, resonant love, a symphony of trust and devotion that needed no translation. Elias drew her close, folding her against his chest. They stood in the hush, two hearts beating as one. Beyond their window, Virel glowed in the night, spires alive with music, laughter ringing through the plazas, a living legacy of hope and change. Below, a pair of Lithari lovers spun together, their laughter chiming like bells in the crystalline air. Elias held his queen, his partner, his love. Once lost and imprisoned, he had found his true home. Not in any city or nation, but in the heart of a princess who learned to sing and who had given his life its deepest meaning.